Possibly more than any other genre of RPGs, horror RPGs have to be very deliberate and careful with creating mechanics that bolster tension, atmosphere, and pacing, while also keeping the players engaged. And Quietus might be the game that exemplifies that. Oz, tell us more about Quietus.
All right. Well, thanks, Bobby. So, Quietus is a rules-light tabletop RPG of melancholy horror for 1 to 2 players and a GM. It was published late 2019 by a designer named Ollie Jeffrey of Sinister Beard Games. The game seeks to emulate character-focused tragic tone from movies like Hereditary or Netflix's The Haunting of Hill House. I've been eyeing this game since it was kickstarted because I wanted a horror game RPG that can create mood and atmosphere without getting in the way with its rules. And this game was promising it, but does it deliver? So I've run a few one-shot horror games, such as Dread, whose main mechanic for action resolution is pulling from a Jenga tower. And while Dread does a great job at creating tension with the wobbly tower, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a gripe with its player elimination. Because one by one, players are removed from the game when their characters die due to knocking the tower over. So since they're no longer in the game, they're forced to sit on the sidelines watching everybody else play the game for possibly hours. And that isn't very fun for them. Another game that I've run is 10 Candles. And the main shtick of that game is actual lit candles being blown out one by one each time someone fails a roll, counting down toward everyone's guaranteed death once the last candle goes out. Now, this is a very atmospheric game, and it allows for lots of player input and improvisational storytelling, which I greatly appreciate, but it suffers from a pace that might either go too quickly because rolls are failing too often back to back, or too slowly because dice rolls aren't failing enough, and it drags the game out. So pacing that is entirely at the whim of the dice, and it can make it really hard to weave a tight but spooky tale. Now, look, I've had memorable games with both. No knocks on either of them. They're still excellent games that they're worth playing. But then there's Quietus. And in my opinion, this game beats Dread and 10 Candles with how it handles player elimination and pacing. And it should be looked at as a new standard for rules-light horror RPGs. So let me break it down. Quietus is a 98-page PDF, but only 8 of those pages are rules. And it uses the basic bare bones of the Blades in the Dark system as a building block. So you roll a few 6-sided dice, the highest die is the result, 6 is a success, 4 to 5 mixed result, and anything lower failure. How bad the consequences are depend on the tension of the scene, uneasy, tense, and desperate, and that's reminiscent of positions in Blades, controlled, risky, and desperate. From there, the rest of the game is all Quietus' own design, and it's to set up pacing and drama. The characters share a hope score, and unless their hopes reaches 5, they cannot escape or defeat the horror. Meanwhile, each character has a despair score, and if their despair reaches 5, the horror kills the character. Because the game is designed to put the two at odds in a close race all the way up to its conclusion, no player character dies too early. And the GM has some control over hope or despair going up, so they can speed up or slow down those points in order to keep the pace that they need to tell a complete, sad, and haunting one-shot story. Something else Quietus does to help tell this kind of tale is the hard limit of 1 to 2 players and a GM, reasoning that you lose the sense of dread and isolation with more players. Now, this is an atmospheric choice. I have to agree with it. Too many characters makes you feel protected. Too many characters means less spotlight on you, with more opportunity to sit back and be passive. Now, none of the mechanics of Quietus inherently require a player limit, because you could play with more if you really wanted, but this is the flag that this game boldly chooses to plant, to be intentionally intimate. And that atmosphere, that introspection, and that desperation is what you're playing Quietus for. It incentivizes players to dive deeper into their characters and their tragedies and their backstories instead of just focusing on the surface level of the horror plot, which is what typically ends up happening in a lot of one-shot games. There's a lot more that I didn't cover in this overview. There's dread points, anxiety points, scars, but I also think that those mechanics are simple and serve to contribute to everything I think this horror RPG wanted to do. So you're going to have to go and check those out yourself, because I highly recommend giving this indie game your support. Go check it out on sinisterbeard.com and follow the designer Ollie Jeffrey on Twitter at @OJeffery. Links in the description below. So I know you guys aren't super experienced in horror RPGs, but you've all played single session one and dones. And a lot of the time that I've played them, I've felt like there's this hurry to move to the next plot point, move to the next plot point, move, and not a lot of opportunity to soak into your psyche. And when you do, it almost feels wrong because you're taking up table time, indulging your inner monologues or your tragic past. And there's like 4 other characters at the table. Bobby, do you remember when we played Little Fears at Gen Con with like 14 people?
Yeah.
Yeah, like how did you feel about that? Like, would you say that I mean, look, we had fun anyway.
Yeah,
I had a blast.
We did.
But
it was there was all the problems that you're talking about did exist there. So
yeah, so
yeah, I remember I was playing that game and then I saw how many people went to the room and I said, I love all these people, I love hanging out with them, but this is too many people to play a role-playing game with.
Yeah. It also didn't feel exactly like what I hear people talk about horror games feeling like. And that is probably speaks to the point that you're making with so many people, which I don't know that I cared that much. I don't have a lot of experience with horror games, really. I've not had the opportunity to play them in a more close, intimate setting like you're talking about. One thing I would worry about with a horror game is that it might get too intense for me. I can handle some intensity, but maybe not as much as some of the other horror junkies that I know that really want to get into it, Well,
actually, so Quietus, and this is something I should have mentioned before, it also does something with their adventure scenarios that I now wish that a lot of other RPG adventures would, which is they have a content warning listing the disturbing themes and elements within the scenario right up top. So GMs can easily skip reading anything that they know that their group won't be comfortable with. And it also has an excellent chapter on safety tools because horror, you're right, horror can inherently push things really far for certain people. So it's good to see a horror, and in different ways too, right? Like what you think isn't that big of a deal can be a big deal to somebody. So it's good to see a horror game take that into account and make sure that a table ensures that they've signed up for a scary experience that they'll be able to walk away from with fond and fun, but still disturbing memories.
Right.
Yeah. Another thing that I also really liked about this game that I sort of alluded to is the scars mechanic, because, and this is more of like how you dive into your character is whenever you narrate a sad or a horrifying flashback from the character's past that you can tie into how you're defending against the horror, the game succeeds at doing that because it gives you bonus dice to your roll against the horror. So it kind of makes it so your tragic past comes into play and helps you in that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
So a little empowering, I guess, to something that might have been otherwise unpleasant. That's a nice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I can't play these games. Too intense for me. Emotionally speaking.
Well,
that the problem with horror games isn't as much getting too intense, but having people buy in enough to where you start really getting that real tension and intensity, because you feel safe playing a role-playing game for the most part, and it's hard to jump into that feeling of horror. You have to really have a lot of buy-in towards that. But also, I've noticed some of the best horror game experience have plenty of times where you're just laughing your asses off at something that happened in the game. Lots of time for I guess, comic relief to relieve the tension.
I feel like
those really just tense, horrific things. Everyone knows it's not time to crack a joke when really at that tight moment that could be otherwise broken.
I mean, I can do Little Fears, right? Because there's this barrier of childhood that prevents things from getting too, I don't know, something, right? But like if I'm playing an adult themed type game, like I feel like, and this is, I don't know, like I don't know exactly how to say it. Some people have, when I describe this sort of thing, it's like this socially, this off button that doesn't exist for me, right? Like it's either I go all in and make it really weird, or I have to like work extra hard to make sure I don't say something that's really awful and offensive. I just had to like pay attention to the reactions of people around me to make sure that that's because I don't have that thing in my head that says, "Oh shit, that's offensive." So like
I jump in and ask you, how often have you played in horror games or games of that type where you've taken the time with a group to go through safety tools where everyone's basically declared which types of issues they're willing to explore in the game, which ones you want to kind of fade to black, and which ones you don't want to touch at all?
Yeah.
Because I suspect if you tackled those issues, you'd have a good idea of where everyone else's boundary is, and then you can play within those boundaries.
Yeah, that could be. But I think again, I think the the content for me throws up red flags that I've put in my head to like not cross. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not because I'm offended by it. It's because I just don't know where the lines are, and I don't want to.
And the thing is, in horror games, you don't want to sanitize the content too much. Well, I mean, that's the thing, right? You want to make sure that you are pushing forward stuff that people are okay with, but sometimes maybe you're pushing something forward that maybe it wasn't discussed, or the way that you're pushing it is just really, really like intense. So
that's a line I just don't know where that line is. So
you should definitely read the safety. You should read the safety tool ideas in Quietus, because they're very illuminating.
Yeah.
Cool. What's unique about horror games as opposed to other RPGs is that in almost every RPG system or game that you're playing, you don't want your players to feel uncomfortable on an emotional level at all. You just don't want that to happen. Whereas in a horror game, you want people to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's a goal.
But in a safe space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's especially as the person who's running the game, I bet that's a really hard line to straddle, you know.
Yeah. I know exactly where all the lines are for all the other genres. So I could free flow, right? I can do my freestyle. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't even like horror movies, so maybe that's just not.
Well, if you like horror movies or just horror games in general, or you're interested in trying out a horror RPG, check out Quietus. Links are in the show notes below. Let us know in the comments if you've played this game, if you like it, what your thoughts are. Like, share, and subscribe. Follow our Discord and join our Patreon and all of that good stuff. Thank you for watching.